The way for us to build a best-in-class solution is to serve this diversity of customers that enable us to keep feeding basically improvements into the product that serve both sides. We had to choose, and we chose basically to risk, in my opinion, the entire product coherence in the name of serving both. And I really believe it's the right decision. I think the hardest part, there were two moments that felt very difficult. One was moving from a state of failure to come to a state of failure realized. The second moment, which is you've come to one certainty, which is this is not working. But then you have to now grapple with the fact, what next? I think you have to stick to it. You have to do what you've set out, understanding that there is a process of discovery and sort of anchoring on the right level of the abstraction to give yourself the means of finding success within the market that you're trying to attack.
Great to have you on the show. Welcome to the New Money Podcast. As usual, behind me, I've got a picture of the Lydian lion, the oldest coin in the world. And with me today, we've got Henri Stern, co-founder and CEO at Privy, who's shaping how the future of money might look like. Henri, great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, Privy is building wallet infrastructure, and we're going to dive into the nitty-gritty details of that in a minute. You guys are backed by Ribbit, Sequoia, Paradigm. I think 75 million accounts run on Privy today. And in June, Stripe acquired the company as many people have speculated, part of the larger kind of like stablecoin and crypto push they've been executing against. So I'm very excited to have you on the show today. I think we've got a bunch of interesting stuff planned. We're going to kind of like walk through the journey until here, from research with then Bonet at Stanford to your first startup, a pivot, and then now the exit to Stripe. Lots to discuss and looking forward to jump right in.
Awesome.
So your first startup was called Shout, if I'm not mistaken, and kind of shut down before it really took off, right? And now you guys sold Privy to Stripe. If you reflect on these two journeys, like what was structurally different about Privy this time?
I think it shut down because it never really took off rather than before it never really took off. But it's a good question. I mean, fundamentally so many things. And so it's very, very hard to compare, right? These are two companies started, call it 6 years apart, but at least the events are about 10 years apart. One was my first job out of college and one was me coming in through a lot more. But maybe if I try to categorize it, Shout was a peer-to-peer marketplace. It was a mobile app. It was very much what you'd expect a company by a college new grad to be built in 2014 to look like, which is to say a mobile app marketplace, very of the moment. I think Privy on the other side is, basically cryptographic infrastructure built for a space that was very out of fashion. And so there's some fundamental differences, in terms of product, idea, market. But I think if you abstract all of that away, maybe the three core differences, and I actually think there are really two that matter. One is probably my co-founder, and the co-founder I had at Shout is an extraordinarily talented person. He went on to build a very successful business called Ro, which is a company in direct-to-consumer healthcare. And a very good friend of mine, but ultimately I think we're friends before we were coworkers and likely did not invest enough in understanding our co-founder relationship in a way that with Asta, whom I work with today and started Privy with, was just a really sort of day one focus, which is how will we work together as co-founders? How do we disagree? How do we push each other, but also push forward together? And that's probably the first really meaningful thing is I think Asta and I are real force multipliers to one another in a way that's rare. And that has taken, real work and broadly been one of the greatest joys for me, at least, of building this company. I think the second one is likely a difference in maturity. If I'm completely honest, I'm a very different person now than I was then. And I think one thing that we've been very good at is being very truth-seeking as a business. And so I think like a lot of at least my instincts first time around was in how can I be proven correct? How can I, show that this is something the market wants and the market may not know it yet, but I will bend the market to my will, as opposed to this time around, which is we know that in this idea maze, there are extremely important and interesting opportunities, things that we're excited to work on. I think from there and from the commitment to that thread, we should hone in entirely on building an extremely high quality product and our utility to our customers. And if we pull on that thread, we will, get to the promised land. And broadly, there's, I think, a lot more focus on our customers, a lot less ego, and a lot more interest in finding truth in market, sort of co-creating than there was the first time around. And so it's meant a completely different experience. I think across these two facets, which are probably just different ways of approaching building a startup.
So interesting. But how do you feel about that kind of like everlasting debate of kind of going in with maximum conviction and then sticking to your conviction versus being iterative, the lean startup approach, right? Building with the customer, A/B testing. Like, what's the take?
Yeah, I think, maybe the hot take is the typical startup book that people will have you read, or at least again, this is a 20-aughts vintage, is like Grit, I think, by Angela Duckworth or something like that. I've not read the book, but the title tells me what I think the book says. And the book says stick to it, basically. And I suspect it's deeper than that, but at least my vision of this is like a lionization of stick-to-itiveness applied to a given problem. And basically, I think that the biggest issue is that there's a problem with understanding at what layer in the abstraction ladder you have to stick to it. So I think grit and fortitude are extraordinarily important, but I think that doesn't mean playing a losing hand. I think that means understanding that you're sitting at the table and understanding the game. And so the book I would actually probably point people to is there's this writer, let me just find her name, called Annie Duke, who was a professional poker player for a long time. She wrote a book called Quit. Again, very good one-word titles for books, Grit and Quit. Quit basically is a lot more about how do you recognize when you're playing the wrong hand. And, the biggest difference between, paraphrasing loosely, but the biggest difference between a professional poker player and an amateur is that I think the amateur folds like 30% of their hands. The professional folds 85% of their hands. And so understanding that the game is your session at the table, it's not the one hand, I think is a very different perspective for building a company. So I think you have to stick to it. I think you have to do what you've set out. But I think understanding that there is a process of discovery and of, again, like being led by the market as much as you're trying to lead it leads to something very different, all the way to, how you pick your investors, the way you talk about your company with them, the expectations you set as to what this is what we're going to do and what this is specifically, and sort of anchoring on the right level of the abstraction to give yourself the means of finding success within the market that you're trying to attack.
Yeah, I honestly think this is one of the big strengths of the United States of America. I think we in Europe, we do this very badly. I see so many teams kind of just grinding it out relentlessly on some sort of felt loyalty to a pre-seed round investor, loyalty towards that initial pitch. And I think that's just like that value destructive, right? In the long run and for a broader ecosystem. I think in a way, it's just ecosystem maturity to have a intellectually honest and rigorous view on hey, we've got talent to allocate, capital also, but maybe more importantly, talent. Let's allocate it to the stuff that's actually working.
Yeah, I don't know what the word is for it in German, but in French, venture capital, at least before, we start talking about the English venture capital, was called risk capital. And it speaks to the difference in mindset that you have when you're even just approaching failure as a concept and the meaning of failure.
I agree. And probably the Germans are much worse than this also than the French, but I think US does this well. Tell us about a moment where you applied that intellectual honesty and what was the toughest one?
I think it gets easier over time, to be honest, because I think it's a muscle. You just kind of change the mindset of the game that you're playing. And we have so much road to go. I guess, to be very blunt, this is just the beginning of our journey. So we have so much to do. And this is part of what I'm excited about is being able to do a lot more. But, we started the company as a data tokenization tool. And the point was to say broadly cybersecurity and through it encryption and cryptography are poorly distributed on the internet. And too many developers basically are taking on data that they don't necessarily have the means of securing. That was the initial premise. So can we build a tool that enables them to build better products by understanding their customers, by taking on that data, but by taking it on responsibly in a safe way and in a way that protects and empowers their customers. And so that was the initial idea. We wanted to apply it to crypto. And specifically, the vision was most developers in the space are flying blind. They don't know who they're building for because all they have is a wallet address. So I don't know you as Ferdinand. I know you as, OX123. And I can't, even send you an email to tell you that you have to top up your account lest you get liquidated in some DeFi protocol or something like that. And so that was the initial idea. And, broadly, there was a mismatch in market. For what it's worth, this idea ended up yielding Privy exactly as it is today. The technology, the stack, the way in which you build this data tokenization engine that is self-custodial, that meaning in this case, it was self-sovereign, but where the user decides what data to reveal, is basically the way you build an embedded wallet product. Just the product muscle and musculature is different, but the inside bones are exactly the same. But basically at the time, really hard to build. A lot of people would say, I really care about privacy, would grill us for hours on end on every aspect of things, would say, oh, this is really interesting. And then, we'd come back a few months later and they would have dumped a ton of user data in a Postgres table that was insecure. And we're like, well, why was this whole grilling for? And they're like, yeah, well, we ended up deciding that it was simple enough to do whatever. And so I think we worked on this product for about we launched this product in about 2.5 months, the first version. And we worked on the product for about 6 months before Asta, my co-founder, said, this is too hard. We're pulling teeth here and we have to look, reality in the face. The market does not want this. And I think I was a little bit more, we have to tough it out and so on. And it took me another few months to get to the same conclusion as her. But it was really hard. And I think the hardest part, there were sort of two moments that felt very difficult, specifically, I guess, teasing it out. One was moving from a state of failure to come to a state of failure realized. And I feel like there's kind of, the Schrodinger's cat of failure, at least that's how my mind works, which is it's like impermanent loss. It's not impermanent loss until you've actually sold. And so there was some comfort in basically living in ambiguity. And I think the first moment of fear or courage is looking reality in the face and saying, you're right, this is not working, or at least we are deciding that it is not worth the energy that we will be putting into making it work. We have to rethink how we do the market. So that was the first moment. And ultimately, once you made that leap, I think it's very freeing. And then the second moment was the ambiguity of then being in a place where it's like, okay, well, we still have this market, this vision, this problem that we're trying to fix, which is ultimately it's incredibly hard to build good crypto products. And crypto is alienating to most users because there's no secure way for them to hold assets without becoming, public key cryptography experts. But you don't know exactly what the product that pops out the other side is. And so that's the sort of second moment, which is you've come to one realization, one certainty, which is this is not working. But then you have to now grapple with the fact, what next? And I think that was probably the hardest part. We had a few months basically really coming to this is what Privy is going to become, that were very hard because we had a lot of white space. We had a team of 6 people. And it was a tough summer.
Do you remember what was the foundational moment for what Privy is now? Customer conversation and insight moment that really changed the game there?
We had a few of these. I mean, the honest sense is we were working our way through 2 versions of ideas that came to the same conclusion. And so we were like, if we pull on this thread, 5 years out, they are the same company, but the go-to-market and the approach to it is very different. And the question was, do we start with key management or do we start with onboarding? And we probably end up in the same place because these are the 2 sides of the problem as the market plays out. So we had fair clarity here. We weren't sure where to start. And I think the foundational moments was really seeing our first product about data tokenization be used broadly for onboarding and key management, which is to say people would use our system to associate emails to wallets, phone numbers to wallets, wallets to each other, private keys to wallets in order to do things. And so really what we did is we took a look at the data and we were like, the people who do want this and who are kind of chewing through glass to get it are all doing it for a purpose it wasn't designed for, which is they're doing it to onboard more users to their products, including users who don't have wallets. And ultimately, that's kind of the thread that we followed. But it wasn't a single moment. It was a slow drip over months.
Amazing. Well, what a journey. And if we kind of like leave the past behind us and look into the future, and you mentioned like, hey, this is still it's still early. Right. And this is the very beginning. What's next? What's on the roadmap specifically? And what are you kind of like most excited to ship over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. And this is the most fun part. So Privy is now working as part of Stripe. We still operate as an autonomous team and as really an independent product. But it's been a major power up in that broadly, we just have so much more muscle to do things that we couldn't do before. Be it in how we approach legal and regulatory questions, in how we work on, money movement and integrating the product as part of wider stacks, in how much faster we can move on engineering and infrastructure lift. And so I think we're just a much more performant machine now, given these resources that Stripe has really honed over, a decade plus.
You really feel you move much faster? Like this is counterintuitive, right? And like it's conventional wisdom is like now you're slowing down. What are the forces at play?
Yeah, I mean, the TLDR is this was a major part of us, coming to an agreement around an acquisition at all was how do we want to structure this? And so this is where I think we structured it specifically understanding this is a frontier market and we need to be able to stay at the cutting edge of this market to serve the customers who are kind of breaking the boundaries of what can be built with this tech. And I think that's always kind of been our model for building product at Privy, which is we will embed with customers. We will be very, very close partners. We will help them ship not just once, but continuously. And so we have, It's all the rage these days, but we have a forward deployed engineering team that really works closely with customers, have typically, monthly syncs with customers who have interesting product shapes so we can continue to co-build with them. And I think we didn't want that model to change. And so very early on in conversations with the folks at Stripe, the point was a shared realization of there's a really wide ocean of opportunity here, and we will get the sale provided we remain extremely fast, extremely flexible, and we take on those things from Stripe that make Privy a much better infrastructure provider to our customers. And so this is not, you're right, it is counterintuitive. And I think it's taken a lot of forethought and focus, but at least we found ourselves really grateful to awesome partners that we have on the other side who are letting us do this. And broadly, the conditions to the acquisition itself were, in a sense, we continue to serve the customers we've been serving across really crypto native and stablecoin minded fintechs, but both are customers who I think are mutually self-reinforcing to us being able to ship best in class software. And we have the ability to work with, Stripe competitors, bridge competitors, but basically we ultimately are trying to do what is best for our customers, regardless of the stack that they pick. And I think the understanding, at least for me, is that modularity is king in a market that's moving very, very quickly.
And tell us about the market. I'd love to double click. Walk us through where the market was when you guys started. Like what was broken about wallets, but onboarding specifically, right? Where did you feel like the wedge really was? And then maybe what are you seeing today, right? Like what different, we've had Bryce from Turnkey on the show a couple of weeks ago, right? Like what different approaches are different market participants taking, and then how do you feel about that?
Yeah. So I think very early on, a lot of debates we were having with customers, as it were, was about, the button on the top right of your site would say connect. And then you would get shown a screen. You would have, typically a slew of wallets. And speaks to how quickly the market moves. We started off and you would have, call it 2 or 3 wallet choices, MetaMask, Rainbow something. And then Rainbow Kit came out and sort of made it much easier to have a long tail of wallets built in as a connector kit. And so people started doing this. But broadly, I think the point for us was, man, crypto is such an island unto itself. It's a very insular place where if you don't know what a wallet is or you don't care, then clicking a button that says connect, and then you've got this slew of a dozen software providers. And, the intricacies of even seeing Wallet Connect, which looks like another wallet button, but then you click it and wait, it's more wallets. There's just a lot of unspoken UX places that we've gotten to. And I think the initial premise for us was let the user connect in the way they're most comfortable. I do think there's a privacy and choice question for the user, which is if the user doesn't want to connect with an email, don't force them to. Let them connect with a wallet. But broadly, you should let the user come in a way that's most helpful. So we had this idea of call it progressive authentication. There may come a time after the wallet connection where you want the user's email so you can contact them. Conversely, the user has an easier time connecting via email and can get benefits from the product before they transact. Our hot take at the time was a lot of the most successful crypto products will be built on a hybrid stack. They will use centralized means for the things that centralized means are better for, and they will use decentralized means for the things that blockchains are useful for. And this was a very hot take at the time where it was, well, no, I mean, the DApp will be a basically front end to a smart contract suite, but that's going to be it. And so that was our worldview. And I think that's where the market was. Fast forward, call it a year and a half or 2 years, I think we just start to see a lot more adoption on 2 fronts. One, the crypto apps that actually embrace meeting users where they are able to cater to a much broader audience and get these people in. And 2, even for the folks who are talking to crypto natives, we're actually seeing conversion on usage of embedded wallets be much, much higher than for external wallets. Just the UX of being able to manage keys as part of the product experience as a user means that the friction to actually transacting, signing is so much lower that even power users, even whales, end up basically favoring that method over others. And from there, the way the market's obviously evolved recently is through the entrance of fintechs and specifically stablecoins that you know very well as part of the conversation, where now there's actually a much, much deeper broadening of this. And it feels like a lot of this infrastructure that we had built is really kind of finding its home by being much more widely distributed. So that's kind of what we're seeing. And then across the market, I think you have different participants focused on different things from, sort of some want to build wallets for payments. Some want to build wallets as, Turing complete key management products. I think our focus has always really been how do we enable users and companies to manage assets securely as part of the application itself so that the developer can get on with their lives. They can have basically a secure on-chain account as part of their products and then they can focus on the parts of their product experience that's actually truly differentiated, all whilst providing a sort of low level and extremely flexible solution to the users that they're serving.
If you think about the kind of like stablecoin moment and how, like you mentioned, right? And I think like the reason why wallet infra is really so quote unquote hot right now is that every company that wants to be serious about stablecoins has to take a deep look at the space, right? Did you anticipate that in any way, or did you see that coming?
I think we started seeing it last summer. The honest take is last summer we were seeing rumblings and things, and then very precisely, I've got the receipts to some extent. I wrote a strategy doc to myself in September of last year, being like the sea is parting, and we're seeing two markets exist. And I've talked a little bit about at times like how stablecoins and meme coins is kind of a tale of two cities of the places where crypto has found a niche, and broadly the stand-in is basically payments and trading. And I think they're very complementary use cases. But at least what I was, I think, trying to articulate back then was we're seeing the sea parting, we're seeing this market emerge. And this will mean that we need to make the appropriate changes to our infrastructure to meet the moment. And specifically for us, we have built, I believe, the most scaled infrastructure solution in the space. I think we're the biggest wallets provider in the market in terms of usage. And the customers that we serve. And we had at the time launched with an abstracted surface where we were focused on how do we make it very easy for smaller development teams to get started. And I think as we saw this, a lot of our focus has been on how do we now take apart some of the abstractions that we've built in order to expose the lower level systems, because as the space scales, people will want access to these lower level things. And so we started this in fall of last year, and have basically been shipping against that roadmap for the last year. And today, again, Privy can be served as an API, a set of SDKs. We have very modular controls around the wallets itself, so that you can have permission scoped access to certain wallets on users' behalf, et cetera, et cetera. And all of this starts with that thread.
If you had to pick one, like tale of two cities, you've got the stablecoin fintechs, you've got the crypto native companies. If you had to bet the company, which one would you go for?
I mean, that's exactly the question we were asking for what it's worth last year. Right. And I guess this is going to seem like a cop-out, but it really isn't. The answer is we chose not to pick. I think that the strategic memo at the time said we can keep betting in one direction, or we can only focus on fintechs. And at least the end of the memo was the right solution is to do both. And there is a chance that doing both will kill us, because we need to focus. But we have a sort of iron belief that these are two basically self-improving sets of customers to work on, and that actually, in order not to overfit our product to any customer shape, we have to serve both. And so the example I really like is we have a very powerful policy engine. So the policy engine lets you basically, a wallet has a set of owners. These owners are what we call key quorums. So for example, we could have a wallet that you and I jointly control. Individually, we're able to do a certain subset of actions. So we can both interface, for example, with USDC as individuals. But if we sign things together, we can interface with USDC, USDT, and some hyperliquid contract to trade. And broadly, like this is an infinitely flexible, basically, way to set policies on wallets. The way we started working on it was because we had agentic trading platforms who were like, I have a wallet, I want to have an LLM trade on the user's behalf, but I'm worried that if the LLM hallucinates, it's going to wreck the portfolio. So how do I limit the spend that the LLM can do on a given day or on a given week in order to prevent a user from losing all their money? And so we built a policy engine for LLMs, basically. And then obviously fast forward 6 months, and we're talking to neobanks and financial institutions who really want these controls. And so I think our core point is we're only scratching at the surface of what can be done, not just with stable coins and trading, but with tokenization overall and with these on-chain systems. And the way for us to build the best-in-class solution is to serve this diversity of customers that enable us to keep feeding basically improvements into the product that serve both sides. So the honest answer is, if we had to choose, and we chose basically to risk, in my opinion, the entire product coherence in the name of serving both. And I really believe it's the right decision.
Was there like a line of fight between you and your co-founder back then, or were you kind of like intuitively aligned?
I think we were intuitively aligned. I think it felt like a very hard decision because it was much easier to do one, but we have at this point dozens of proof points that it was the right call, because we just see the ways in which our product is more flexible and more tunable for customers across the board because of this decision. So it requires a lot of very active product work, and it requires us to work as closely with our customers as we do. But we were pretty aligned. I don't think there was a battle lines drawn of one of us wants this, one of us wants that. I think it felt like something we got to together.
Awesome. So before we talk about the acquisition and we talk about business, let's briefly talk about the technology you guys are building, right? I think to talk to the listeners, what makes you guys special technically? I think we've briefly touched on trusted execution environments versus maybe NPCs, and how do you feel about technical trends and technical depth where you guys shine?
Yeah. So I'll describe the system. Maybe I'll give our philosophy first, and I'll describe the system concretely. So I think the philosophy for us is we want to create unified, sort of elegant surfaces that enable our customers to test anything they want and adopt any trend they like in terms of technical stacks. But we also don't want to be first adopters when we can help it on any given single piece of technology that we then impose on our customers. Because when you're dealing with key cryptography and with self-custody, there are a lot of one-way doors, and we want to be careful not to go through a one-way door and be wrong, basically. And so I'll give like a couple of examples of what I mean by this. We were very early. I think we might in fact have been the first. I don't think we're basically an integrated experience with 4337. This is an EIP related to account abstraction that enables folks to create smart accounts on EVM chains controlled by an EOA, or in this case, an embedded signer, which is the exact same thing as an embedded wallet. And the way it works for us, and this speaks to our focus on sort of elegance and integration. It's unlike, I think, other customers, but this is a real, I think, competitors. I think this is an actual sort of important point of what happens when you're actually developing with these things day in, day out, is we don't just tell you, here's a guide for how you can integrate 4337. We do that, but that's not where it ends. We, on top of that, basically give you a platform where you can select who you want your 4337 factory to be, set up your bundler and your paymaster URLs, so more or less the APIs that you want to plug into to power this thing. And then whenever you create an account, we'll automatically call the smart contract factory. So you'll create the embedded wallet, you'll automatically call the smart contract. You will link the embedded signer to the smart contract. So now you've got a fully functional on-chain account. And then whenever you make a transaction, we sign it as a user op, which is kind of the format that's needed to talk with the smart contract. So what this means for the developers, you don't have to integrate 15 tools. You don't have to sort of chew through the glass of all of this. You just need to set up your API and you're good to go. Privy takes care of all of it. But this isn't something that we force you to do. This is an option because we felt like this was a sort of forward-looking future development for the space, but not one we wanted to force our customers into. We just wanted to ease it if that's what they chose. So that's maybe the first sort of big differentiator is, I think, our approach to how hard to lean and how much power to give our customers with regards to new innovations. I think we've struck a very good line with it in a way that's basically always meant that our customers can use Privy wallets interoperably with any technology that exists in the space. But we never lock them into that technology set in a way that they'll kind of get bitten in the ass for it. And for 4337, like an example of the way in which it would bite you is if you're actually planning on building a very multi-chain experience, there's limited support across different chains for 4337. And so you'd have customers who would start there and they'd be like, fuck, I'm stuck now. I need to unwind this decision. Sort of more basic system, the way we operate it is we basically have a TE-based system that links with Intermediate secret sharing. So we use key splitting and trusted execution environments to basically ensure that keys are only under their owner's control. Specifically, when a given owner has authenticated or through a direct P256 signer into the wallet, to get a little technical, comes in, they can generate a wallet. The wallet is always generated in a secure execution environment, so either in a TE or on device. And then it is immediately split. And there are two things that gives us that I think is unlike any competitor. The first is existence of two secure execution environments means you can choose as a developer whether you want to have this happen in an enclave or on device. And depending on what you're looking for, this means that you can get extremely low latency wallets by having on-device reconstitution where, times for any signature is somewhere between 20 and 40 milliseconds. And no solution, be it MPC or otherwise, can compete with that because, physics makes it that you have a network round trip time that you have to beat. And so that's something that we learned by just working with customers, but it's a configuration that I think we're the only ones to have, and that speaks to the flexibility of Privy system. Conversely, you can also do it in the enclave, and here we have done, meaning in the TE, and here we've done a lot of work with server co-location, and we run a lot of benchmarks to specifically ensure that we're faster than anyone else, but to provide basically best inline latency, which is what customers of ours, like Hyperliquid, like Jupiter, big trading platforms, Pump, need in order to be competitive in their markets. So that's the first piece is basically this secure execution environment is really important. The second is the key splitting that we add on top of it. We basically don't stop with that. We then split the keys as well in order to have flexibility around how key shards are managed. And I think the important thing there is to make sure that there are redundancies so that you don't have a single point of failure around a single infrastructure provider, Amazon Nitro Enclaves or anything else. And so by having key splits, we can have different trust models basically to enable for customers. So that's broadly what I think from a deeper architectural level sets us apart and allows us to both be best in class in terms of performance, but also in terms of security.
If you think about that broader philosophy of kind of like being frontier, but never being first mover on the foundational technologies, what's one of these technologies that you've been tracking and that you're kind of like keen to see how it plays out to potentially work with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the successor in some ways to 4337 is this ERC, or I think it's an ERC, called 7702. And it basically gives the ability for embedded wallets, for EOAs specifically to delegate transaction execution or transaction validation logic to a smart contract. And so it gives basically traditional wallets sort of smart wallet superpowers. And it's something that we're very excited about because it unblocks a number of things that we know our customers want without many of the trade-offs that we've seen in the past. So it's something that we're tracking. In fact, we are near to releasing a number of features that come from a deep integration of that technology in our stack in a way where it's no longer an option you can have. It's actually something where we're like, this is better for everybody. We should just make it a default for Privy.
Let's talk about Stripe X Privy. So I read this joke about the acquisition when you guys went live, which went something like, Sequoia is really good at selling their portfolio companies to Stripe. How real is that? Like, walk us through the process. How did the acquisition, how did the partnership come to be?
I can't speak highly enough of our partners at Sequoia, Sean and Josephine, and the partnership generally. I think, the line I've been told, and I think it's real, and I think it's been real with so many of the investors that we've worked with, but it feels like we really lucked out, is some investors help you get lucky in a number of ways you couldn't have predicted. And I think it's been true of the folks that we've worked with. And so I think that way of, Sequoia, of Ribbit, of Paradigm, all of them have been incredible partners. But this really came, I think, through much more natural conversations that Stripe was having around how do wallets work. We'd met some of the team. We started having conversations around what we saw in the wallet space. And little by little, it led to a conversation around, all right, we see this as really important. We know we want to be deeper here. We think we can bring a lot to the Privy customer base as well, and that there are many things that we'll get to build with this technology. Maybe it makes sense to partner more deeply, and then a conversation started there. This is not to take away from Sequoia. Factually, chronologically, not how it happened. That said, I think having amazing investors is always incredibly helpful.
What's the main way Stripe helps you, if you had to choose one?
Well, first, I think it's like, what do we want to focus on as a company? There's so many things that come with building a company that are not about product, not about technology, not about security, which are really the things that we are focused on. And so I think it's been being able to put on horse blinders. We have a lot of support basically in all of these other parts of the business, in exchange for which we get to really double down on these things. So, these are very simple things, but at our stage of a company, you start building out finance functions, legal functions, all of these things that help a business run, that I think Stripe has done and beautifully. And so that's the first part. I think the second is obviously from a product integration surface. We're kind of kindred spirits in that I think Stripe has built kind of the defining developer tool suite of the last decade, some in terms of API taste, in terms of modularity. And so I think there's a lot for us to learn there, but getting to talk to, the API standards team to get refinements on our own product, getting to learn from docs and how they build this. So there's all this stuff that makes a product really, really good. And then obviously there's the reach that Stripe has through the folks that they work with, through the teams that they have. And so it kind of feels like we're both able to focus in more, and then as needed, kind of bring in the special forces to help us on the things where they have real expertise.
So it's kind of like support functions, distribution, then kind of like product learnings and education.
And we're only a month in.
On that broader strategy, there was this talk about the L1, right? Tempo. And I think there was quite a bit of slander on that on the timeline, right? We've got like Circle Arc, we've got Stripe Tempo, everyone building their own thing. So what's your bull case here on these kind of like closed system L1s?
I'll speak from our view as a wallet provider, which is, I think fragmentation is both a real challenge to be overcome and a real opportunity for the space, only in that it stands to reason that chains are not one size fits all. And so broadly, I look at a lot of our partners that we work with on enabling cross-app chain and cross-token execution. And this feels like a major hurdle, but I think it's going to be really hard. And this is far before, you saw it on the timeline with EVM L2s. You saw it before that with Solana. I think there's no debate that crypto people like better than fighting about which chain they're on or which chain like team color they represent. And broadly, I think there's trade-offs to it, as with anything. But I don't see us putting the cat back in the bag. And so this is not a nihilistic view, but it's to say I think there are going to be very worthwhile chains that come up with legitimately interesting innovations that have very different performance metrics that are designed for different things, and where we'll kind of see, the product shine in that way, because, chain as a protocol is in itself kind of a product in terms of the rails you want to run on. And I think kind of our prerogative at Privy is to ensure that the developers we serve are able to get the best of what they're trying to get without locking themselves into a rail. And so I think this is where interoperability across chains, bridging, swapping are really important parts of what we're building to make sure that this isn't a bunch of separate closed off islands, but it's actually a very vibrant ecosystem.
Looking at the time, we're going to wrap it up with a quick round of quickfire questions. Henry, if you had to be the CEO of one other fintech or crypto company, which one?
I'm going to dodge the question, and I would love to be CEO of Disney, but I'm very happy at least working on Privy in this in the places we work.
We talked about account abstraction, unlock or overkill?
Both.
What is your favorite recent Privy-powered app experience?
I mean, I've had a lot of fun over this weekend, as it were, playing with football.fun, which is a fan and trading app for basically like football clubs and football players built, or at least a team that leverages Privy as well. And I think it's been quite amazing.
Most underrated crypto UX, can be company or specific feature?
Hyperliquid, I think, has done an incredible job taking a very technical set of interfaces and optimizing them for an audience they really understand. So it's hardly underrated, but it is still underrated.
Can't be overrated. Henry, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Lots of fun. Great to talk about the journey so far, about Stripe, about what's ahead. Anyone who's listening, of course, we do this every week. So tune in and see you soon.
Thank you.